Hey, everybody. Welcome to Wicked Truths and F-Bombs, WTAF. I'm Danielle, and we have Amy here with us.
Hi,
as well.
everybody.
How's everyone doing? If you can just let us know that our sound is okay before we get started. We always got to do a sound check.
When I was a 29-year-old kid, I got elected to the United States Senate out of nowhere. Remember that?
Sorry. If you can just... I'm trying to bury it down here and get it turned off.
It's always something.
It is. That was my fault.
Oh, no. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm using a different method tonight.
I can hear you. I can hear you
Okay.
great.
Good.
All right, let's see.
Something.
Oh my gosh, Amy, I turned my volume down like 30 times. All right, let's see how many people we have here and see if we want to wait a few more minutes until a couple more people join. In the meantime, what?
I said, someone open a portal.
Portal. In the meantime, if you're new here, our channel doesn't have many rules. The main rule is to not speak about other creators negatively, in good light, whatever. We just try not to talk about other creators here. And we focus on the case and be kind to each other in the chat. You'll have to bear with me. I have allergies going on today, so I'm kind of raspy and
Get your sexy Phoebe voice on.
yeah. I might have to mute myself because I keep coughing.
That's no good.
It's definitely not COVID. It's just,
Oh, say that word.
Yeah, no, we're not allowed to say that word.
Beep.
Anyways, we I guess can go ahead and get started. How many of you in the chat have read this book or listened to it? I don't know if any other creators have read it or did any live readings, but we are going to be reading all of the books that we have obtained so far. I will embarrassingly admit that I've spent a little bit too much money on these books from Chad Daybell and Melanie Gibb. I've got quite a few, so we're going to just trudge our way through them and read some of their thoughts. So,
Yikes.
yeah.
Everybody ready to leap into eternity?
Ready for the portals to open?
No, thank you.
All right, let me get this device opened here. So, the book that we are reading, I don't know if I have. Oh, it's okay. So, the book that we are reading is called Living on the Edge of Heaven, written by Chad Daybell. I don't know who's read it, who hasn't read it, but I guess we'll go ahead and get started.
Are we gonna read the preface or?
Yeah, yep, we can start there with the author's note, right?
Right. You want
Um,
who wants to go first?
you can go first.
All right. I'll try to pronounce everything properly. Let's
If you
see.
don't, it's okay.
We have dictionary.com.
We do. We do.
All right. Author's note. This book is not my full autobiography. I mainly hit the highlights of how the Lord has guided me through certain situations and how my interactions with the spirit world have impacted my decisions. I discuss why I write my novels and publish books by other people who have had near death experiences. When I have used a person's full name, I've either received his or her permission, or I feel the story is generic enough that it won't harm the person's reputation. In regard to my missionary companions, I only use their last names. In other cases, I have simply used first names or changed the name to protect the person's privacy. There are dozens of friends, relatives, and authors who have made a powerful impact on me that aren't mentioned in these pages, simply because of the unique nature of the book. Please know I greatly appreciate each of you, and I hope you enjoy this glimpse into my aspect of my life that I kept hidden for many years. How prophetic. Do you want me to go ahead with the introduction?
Yes, you can. Sorry, I'm trying to get something pulled up here.
That's all right. I'm going to go, I'll just go on ahead. Okay, introduction. The idea for this book actually came after a discussion with my father. He was preparing to teach a lesson to his high priest group, and he was looking for any instances that spoke of familial councils on the other side of the veil. He had been taught privately by church leaders about this principle, but such a concept is virtually absent in the current curriculum. As a church, we talk about family history a lot, focusing on the souls trapped in spirit prison who need us to do their temple work. But we rarely mention our righteous ancestors who are closely watching us from the other side of the veil. In this book, you'll read of several instances where I've been able to receive their guidance. I believe that just as we hold family councils on this side of the veil, similar meetings are being held there too, with a focus on how to help those on earth. That perspective can help us unify our families and bring a broader view to our missions in life. When the angel Moroni visited young Joseph Smith in his bedroom in 1827, he quoted Malachi a little differently than is found in the Bible. And he shall plant in the hearts of children the promises made to the fathers, and the hearts of the children shall turn to their fathers. If it were not so, the whole earth would be utterly wasted at his coming. Joseph Smith History 139. I believe we made agreements with our close relatives before we came to earth. We are now seeking to fulfill those promises, and our relatives who have passed on are also striving to keep the promises they made to us. It's a glorious concept as we work together from both sides of the veil. Another purpose of this book is to provide assurance and comfort in those who have felt on the edge of heaven. You are not alone. Over the past few years, as my life story has become more well known, I have received hundreds of emails from people who are happy to find someone who has had a similar experience. I understand how they feel. After all, I've waited several years to share the unusual experiences contained in this book. Why? Because I feared that my family and friends might think I had gone crazy. This reluctance with the LDS Church to share spiritual experiences is a rather recent phenomenon. After all, the church itself was established and fortified through miraculous visitations from heavenly messengers. For the first 160 years after the church was established by Joseph Smith in 1830, sharing inspiring spiritual experiences was quite common. Lengthy near-death experiences and accounts of visitations from deceased ancestors were regularly printed in the Deseret News and other church publications through the 1930s. Many books were compiled of these experiences, and I have them in my personal library. For the past few years, though, there has been a subtle trend to discourage the sharing of personal spiritual experiences. I don't believe this is what the Lord intended. He makes it clear in the scriptures that we should edify each other through inspiring words rather than cast stones at those who seek to share uplifting messages. Some members take an excerpt from 1971 talk by Elder Boyd K. Packer and say we shouldn't discuss special experiences. However, it is important to read the quote in context. Occasionally, during the past year, I have been asked a question. Usually it comes as a curious, almost an idle question about the qualifications to stand as a witness for Christ. The question they ask is, have you seen him? That is a question that I've never asked another. I have not asked that question of my brethren in the quorum, thinking that it would be so sacred and so personal that no one would have some special inspiration, indeed, some authorization even to ask it. There are some things just too sacred to discuss. We know that as it relates to the temples in our, We know that as it relates to the temples. In our temples, sacred ordinances are performed, sacred experiences are enjoyed, and yet we do not, because of the nature of them, discuss them outside those sacred walls. It is not that they are secret. but they are sacred, not to be discussed, but to be harbored and to be protected and regarded with the deepest of reverences. President Packer was talking about the actual appearance of Jesus Christ to a mortal. He also mentioned the sacredness of the temple ordinances. I agree completely with President Packer that those items fall in the too sacred to discuss category. I have many sacred moments in my life that will never be shared publicly. I guard them and treat them with reverence, and they aren't included in this book. However, many of my experiences are simply out of the ordinary or unusual rather than sacred. We sometimes forget that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. This earth is a tiny portion of a grand cosmic operation. Our real life isn't on this planet. We are part of an eternal family, and it only makes sense that we would feel a connection to our ancestors on the other side of the veil. They are fully aware of what we are doing, and they seek to help us when we need it. Nearly every culture on this earth feels this way about their ancestors except for the Western world. We have let our spirituality pendulum swing to a low point in the past few years, and we only believe in things that can be verified by our five senses. Hopefully the pendulum is starting to swing back so that we can share sincere, humble spiritual experiences again. Recent talks and general conference by several general authorities, including apostles Elder B. Ehring and Elder Russell M. Nelson, shared personal stories involving the spirit world, and a reawakening seems to be happening within the church. We can still read and cherish the amazing experiences the early saints had, but it is time for living, breathing LDS members to add their stories to this collection. I'm not saying all these experiences need to be published or even posted on Facebook, but if you have such an experience, please record it for your posterity. I hope this book demonstrates that visionary people can live normal lives, be fully active in the church, and wholeheartedly sustain the general authorities. The visionaries I have met are humble followers of the Lord, and I expect the number of dreams and visions to increase among the saints as times get tougher and rely more on personal revelation to guide us. Well, on with the story. I've had an unusual life, and I'm grateful for the chance to share my experiences with you. Chad Daybell, May 2017.
So it's hard. Thank God my mic is muted, because it's hard to even listen to this because you hear things like pendulum. His speaking of the cosmic world. And then he speaks about how the dreams and visions were allowed in the church at one point and now they're not, and he doesn't agree with that. So basically he's saying he's just going to go ahead and run with it because that's what he believes. Is that what you
Not
took
only,
away?
well, definitely. I also noticed that he highly aligns himself with, the LDS doctrine, but yet in the same introduction, he challenges the LDS doctrine.
He does. He does. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll move on to the next chapter, chapter 1, and let us know in the chat, guys, anything that you want to talk about or anything you find intriguing, because these books are really telling. They're hard to read, I won't lie. They're it's like reading sci-fi novels almost. But then you're like, so this is reality to him, and it's reality to other people as well. And his reality and what became Lori's reality is what caused a lot of deaths, I believe. That's my opinion. So,
Well, he's not very prophetic if he ended up sitting in the court.
right.
You'd think you'd have the clarity to avoid that sitch, but but no.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Okay, chapter 1, Leaping into Eternity. On a sunny day in August 1985, I stood on the edge of a 60-foot cliff overlooking Flaming Gorge Reservoir in northern Utah. I felt dizzy just looking down at the water, but I knew I needed to jump to impress the other young men from my LDS church group. We had started the day by leaping off cliffs that were about 20 feet high. That was fun, but we noticed this particular cliff jutting out over the water. It looked like a natural diving board. My friends and I watched someone else jump from the ledge, and soon we were scrambling up the hillside. Once we got up there and saw how highly it truly was, we were intimidated, but we were also stupid teenagers. My pals finally convinced me to go first. I had just turned 17 and was heading into my senior year at Springville High School, where I would serve on the student council. I had a summer job with the Springville City Parks Department as a maintenance worker, but other than that, life was pretty carefree. I had experienced some close calls the previous few months, though. I had recently gone on a water skiing trip to Lake Powell, and while being pulled by the boat, I fell face first into the water. I wish we could have seen that. Anyways, the tip of one of the skis smacked me in the face and briefly knocked me out. I suffered a deep gash between my nose and upper lip that took 12 stitches to close. I still have that scar, and it has made it impossible for me to ever grow a decent mustache. Oh gosh. If I laugh, you guys, I'm sorry, because I find some of this amusing. A few weeks after that, I had gone golfing with my friends. On one hole, I hit my tee shot, then stood against a tree about 30 yards up the fairway as the final member of our foursome took his turn. He took a mighty swing and drilled the ball right at me. I barely had time to duck. The ball grazed the top of my head, then made a small indentation in the tree before dropping to the ground behind me. My friend hurried toward me and shouted, "Whoa, I thought I killed you." There were similar incidents that summer, and I felt somewhat like a marked man. I sensed that someone didn't necessarily want me dead, but only mostly dead, to steal a line from The Princess Bride. Jumping off this cliff wasn't helping my odds. I shook off my nervousness and took another long look at the blue water below me. Finally, I pushed off with my right foot and began my descent. I remember thinking, this has taken a really long time. When I finally hit the water, I felt like I had slammed into concrete. A shock went through my entire body, and I saw a white flash of light. I felt an audible pop at the base of my skull, and I thought, oh no, I broke my neck. I also wondered if I had cut my forehead open because there was a brief searing pain above my eyes. I quickly realized something even worse was happening. My spirit was partly out of my body. Well, gee golly, what do you think about that one, Amy? I can't.
I think he was partly out of his mind. No stash Daybell. My goodness.
No,
you know what I think about this when I hear it? I think Chad doesn't really have friends, and he's so socially awkward, he doesn't realize that he is the butt of jokes. And he does things that he knows are dangerous in order to impress other people, and you will see that later in his life with Lolo.
Yeah. It's something, I'm telling you. Okay. So now that he has decided that his spirit was partly out of his body, we'll move on. The best way to describe it is my physical body went deeper into the water than my spirit did. That makes sense, Chad. This caused my spirit to pop out through my head. And then it felt like my spirit's knees got stuck in my skull and I didn't make it out all the way. During those moments, I could see on the other side of the veil. I saw an endless white plain in all directions. There seemed to be a distinct horizon, hundreds of miles in the distance. I also heard a deep, rich melody that sounded like a synthesizer. The pain I felt a few moments earlier was gone. There was a soothing warmth surrounding me, and I also felt tangible energy particles of knowledge rushing towards me from all directions. I just soaked it all in. Within seconds, though, my body started to float toward the surface. My spirit quickly reversed course through my head and got sucked back into place. I instantly felt chilled and somewhat paralyzed. I must have taken a long time getting to the surface because one of my friends who was standing on the shore had jumped into the water to rescue me. He grabbed hold of me, and we swam to the water's edge. All I said was, something snapped when I hit the surface. I'm done for the day. Huh. Man, the spirit just popped out of my head. Oh, boy. Okay, so the next portion is called A Change of Perspective. My entire body was sore for a week, and even then I felt off kilter, like my body and spirit were disjointed. Sometimes my right eye would just go blind, but if I hit the side of my head with my palm, oh my gosh, I could see again. I didn't tell my
Shut
parents
up.
about it. Yes.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Anybody who's listening, do not take this advice. If you lose your vision, don't hit the side of your head. Don't do that.
And by the way, that feeling of warmth in the water was him urinating himself.
Right?
I mean, that's all that was. And the 80s music was probably some lame flock of seagulls coming from like far, far away.
Right? I'm just going to take a guess and say all of those sensations he felt were multiple reasons, like hitting ice cold water. He probably didn't know how to swim, and he's an idiot. I mean, there's no other way to sum it up besides he's just, wow.
And now he's going to use this as his defense. Remember that one time when I hit myself in the head because I was going blind?
Yeah.
Good Lord. That's not why you're going blind, Chad. I'll mute myself.
Yeah, you're right. The fact that people, what'd she say? The fact that people believe this fool has me intrigued. It is intriguing why people believe this. So I guess we can consider ourselves the normal ones, right?
Ugh. I never thought I'd say that about myself. Do go on.
No, I didn't think I was normal either, but I'm a little bit more normal, I think, after reading this book, because I'm like, yeah, I'm not like that. So there must be something right. Not that it's all right here, but you know what I'm saying. Okay. A change of perspective. I got through that part. On the other hand, I was spiritually changed. I had glimpsed another dimension, and it had felt like home. I didn't recall talking to anyone in the white light, but I remembered the infusion of spiritual energy that had surrounded me. I now had an interest in gospel topics like never before and began to devour church-related books. The scriptures. Excuse me, you guys, if I pronounce these names wrong. Cleon Skousen, Hugh Nibley, Bruce R. McConkie, and so on. I had the strong impression I would need this information later in life. I still had a social life and a great set of friends, but I became very receptive to sensing disembodied spirits, as well as receiving direct promptings and impressions that helped keep me out of danger. This change was quite a letdown when it came to dating. If I dated a girl I really liked more than 2 or 3 times, the spirit didn't mess around when I prayed whether the relationship would develop. Although almost before the words were out of my mouth, I could hear a resounding no. This was disheartening in the short term, but I hoped it meant there was someone very special out there who would become my better half. In retrospect, I believe when I hit the water and my spirit exited my body, my personal veil was torn open near my forehead and never sealed back up properly. I'm just going to read that line one more time. In retrospect, I believe when I hit the water and my spirit exited my body, my personal veil was torn open near my forehead and never sealed back up properly. That's why I felt physically out of sync. And as I think back on the other previous accidents that summer, I believe that they were attempts to accomplish what had happened at the Flaming Gorge. To fulfill my mission in life, I needed a good shot to the head to tear my veil a little, and the angels finally orchestrated it. And there you have it. That's how Chad became a prophet, because his veil got torn open near his forehead and it never sealed back up properly.
I hate it when
And
that happens.
yeah, you hate it when that happens.
I think he needs more than a better half. I think he needs another 99%. I'll give him the 1%. Kind of like the shit they take out of milk before you drink it. But other than that.
Thank you, Amy Severio, for the super chat. You're so kind. Thank you. Man, I just can't. I have a hard time believing that he needed a good shot to the head to tear his veil a little, and the angels finally orchestrated that for him.
Aww.
The comments are hilarious.
I can't see the chat at all tonight, so
oh, they're hilarious.
I feel left out. I will have to go back and take a peek.
Let me read some of them to you. We can take a break and read some of them to you. Let's see.
Oh wait, I can get it up on the. They're not loading on my StreamYard.
Brooks Channel said his personal veil. I'm going to be brain dead by the end of this. There's lots of people laughing down here. Lady Chase.
Oh, I see him now.
Okay. Oh.
He's a kook. Now say that.
It's actually funner to. Yeah, it's more fun to read it with you guys because your comments make it bearable to read. Because I've had this book, I don't know, a couple months now, and I was like reading it. Amy messaged me earlier and she's like, "You're on page 25. I'm like, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. You can just swipe past that, because I couldn't tell you what was in it. I remember it being really like, what the WTAF? I'm not going to say the words. And I didn't go back because it was so horrid. So
they need the Jesus juice down there, they say.
Oh, Charlie Hunt's laughing so much she thinks she ripped. Oh, you think you ripped her personal veil. Oh, that's hilarious.
Oh my God.
So I guess we'll move on to chapter 2.
Woohoo! You ready for some alliteration? Faithful forefathers. In order for you to fully appreciate the rest of the story, I need to share a few important tidbits about my ancestry. Oh, yay. If you are acquainted with any of my Daybell relatives, I hope you consider them to be good-hearted, hardworking people. We rarely serve higher in the church beyond being a bishop or a Relief Society president, and a lot of us would much rather be at the rodeo or in the mountains than at our Sunday meetings. Okay. But then the going gets tough. You can be sure we'll be there to help in any way we can. Nearly all of the Daybells in the western United States come from the same common ancestor, Finity Daybell. He and his wife, Mary, joined the LDS Church in England during the 1840s, but they were too poor to travel to the United States during the mass Mormon migration in the 1850s. So they built a portal. No, I'm kidding. Finity had strained his back hauling lumber, and the family spent time living in an actual poorhouse when he couldn't work. By the early 1960s, Finity's health was restored and the family was doing better financially. At that time, Elder Joseph F. Smith, a future president of the church, was serving a mission in England. The missionaries faced a lot of persecution and even death threats, yet they continued preaching the gospel. One day, Elder Smith and his companion were speaking to a crowd in the town square. Soon a man in the crowd brought out a basket of rotten eggs, and he and his friends began throwing the eggs at the missionaries. Elder Smith was wearing a stovepipe hat, and an egg splattered against it. I'm sorry. At this moment, Finity came into the square. He had come to town to fix his plow, but when he saw what was happening to Elder Smith, he took action. He knew the missionaries had been told not to fight back against their persecutors, but he knew he certainly would. Finity ran towards the man who, Finity ran toward the men who were throwing the eggs. He grabbed the egg basket from the ringleader and swung it forcefully at the man's head. He didn't hit anyone with a swing, but the men knew he meant business and quickly scattered as Finity reared back and swung again. Soon, only Finity and the two missionaries stood in the square. Elder Smith stepped forward and thanked Finity for his courage. Moving to Utah. That experience helped Finity realize he needed to move his family to Utah. They saved up their money for 2 years and then made the trek in May 1864. They traveled by ship to New York Harbor in the midst of the U.S. Civil War. Finity found a spot for his family in a train boxcar heading west, but their journey was often delayed because the train tracks had been uprooted by the warring enemies. They finally left the train behind and took a steamboat to Nebraska, then made the rest of the journey to Utah in wagons. They finally reached Salt Lake City in October, 5 grueling months after they had departed from England. Finity, I'm reading a photo caption. Finity sought out Elder Joseph E. Taylor, who had baptized him many years earlier. Joseph said he had some property near the town of, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Heber, and Finity offered to farm it. The family traveled to the area at the top of Provo Canyon, now known as Charleston. They barely survived a horrible winter living in muddy dugouts in the side of a hill, but the next spring, Finity and his sons established their farm and became prominent citizens there. I'm the descendant of Finity's son George, who became a well-known landowner and farmer. However, on a clear summer day in 1913, George's life was cut short when a bolt of lightning struck him as he raised a pitchfork into the air while moving hay. He was killed instantly. Stop it. Stop.
Oh,
George's son Robert took over the farm, but in 1925, the family learned the soon-to-be-built Deer Creek Reservoir would eventually cover their property with water. Robert scraped together the money he had and made a payment on a house in the Provo River bottoms. The home was smaller than they were accustomed to, but it had 5 acres of land, including an apple orchard. Robert went to work using a set of draft horses to dig basements and plow garden spots. He also earned money harvesting fruit. In the summer of 1929, the family moved to a nicer home on the South State Street in Provo. Robert and his brother Will went into business raising chickens. They built large coops and bought dozens of baby chicks, building up a substantial debt. Later that year, their worst nightmares came true. The stock market crash in October 1929 ruined the economy. The brothers lost everything they owned, including the house, and suddenly the family was in the depths of poverty. Robert was able to rent a house in southwest Provo, and the family lived there throughout the Great Depression. Robert was able to find work through government programs, but it was hardly enough to support the family. Horsing around. Robert had a son named Keith, who became my grandpa. Keith was 10 years old when the Great Depression hit, and his mother kept him busy doing chores and small jobs to help the family stay afloat. Keith's parents rarely had reason to be angry with him, except for one little adventure while he was attending Dixon Junior High in Provo. He'd been riding his horse near the school when he noticed some girls on the playground. He started chasing the girls around, making them scream. They started running into the school with Keith right behind them on the horse. They headed up the school steps and flung open the doors. Before the doors could close, Keith made it into the school, horse and all. This caused quite a scene, and both the school teachers and his parents were mighty upset with him. Keith loved horses, but he may have had second thoughts the day he tried to shoe one of them. As he bent down to grab the horse's leg, he got kicked squarely in the mouth, cracking one of his front teeth. A dentist placed a gold cap on the tooth, and from then on, Keith was a bit more careful around horses' hooves. Keith had met Rosalie, Barnson the previous spring at Springfield High's junior prom. Rather than taking dates during those lean years, students would go in groups and then mingle at the dance. Keith and his friends had decided to drive over from Provo and drop in on the dance. Keith and Rosalie got to know each other, but Keith's other two friends actually asked Rosalie out first. She said the first friend turned out to be obnoxious, and then the second friend also failed to catch her fancy. So Keith finally asked her out, and they had a pleasant time. Rosalie found herself attracted to Keith's kind, happy personality and his blue eyes. He combed his brown hair straight back, but she liked it when it would get ruffled and curled a bit at the sides, and they were soon going steady. Wonder what she thought about his gold tooth. Then they spent Easter hiking up Springfield's Round Peak for lunch, and they took a horseback ride up Provo's Rock Canyon that summer, which was Rosalie's first time on a horse. They dated for more than a year before being married in 1937. The couple had planned on being married in an LDS temple, and Rosalie was able to receive a temple recommend, but due to Keith's work schedule, he had been unable to attend church very often. Keith enjoyed church, but found himself scheduled to work most Sundays. His bishop felt Keith should wait before receiving a recommend so that the marriage was performed at Rosalie's parents' home in Springfield. As the wedding was about to start, all the invited guests were there except Keith. Rosalie began to wonder if she'd been stood up. Keith finally rushed in a few minutes later, explaining the gold cap on his front tooth had fallen off, and he had hurried to the dentist for a little cement to keep it in place. Oh, Lord. It was tradition. He just should carry a chiclet in his pocket, really. It was tradition for friends of a newly married couple to try to keep them apart for as long as possible after the ceremony and make them suffer through embarrassing pranks. Oh, you Mormons. This mischief could last for at least a day or two, and Keith and Rosalie wanted to avoid being separated on their wedding night. Rosalie had heard that her friends had borrowed a large baby buggy with plans of putting a bonnet on her head and parading her down Provo's Center Street. Keith's friends had similar plans for him, so the couple enlisted the help of his sister Eva and her husband Paul. After the ceremony, the newlyweds rushed to the garage, hopped into Paul and Eva's car, and sped away. They had arranged to stay at Paul and Eva's house for the night while Paul and Eva took Keith's car and spent the night at a motel. The plan worked just fine, foiling the friends' pranks. War overshadows daily life. Keith and Rosalie had a simple but happy life together, and they welcomed the birth of their son Ray in 1939. However, on December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Hawaii's Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States into World War II. Young American men were drafted into the armed forces and trained for battle. The government first drafted single men in their late teens, but as the war dragged on and the casualties mounted, older men and even married men were drafted to serve their country. Keith was willing to serve his country, but he felt anxious about possibly being drafted and leaving his young family, especially since the war didn't appear anywhere near a conclusion. Keith opened a Texaco gas station on the northeast corner of 400 North and Main near Springfield, where a doctor's clinic is now located. Ray had grown to be a healthy, fun-loving, and slightly mischievous child, and in early 1944, he gained a brother with similar qualities named Lanny. Rosalie's brothers, Leon, Glenn, and Homer, were all enlisted in the armed services by then. Then in May, a dreaded letter arrived. Keith had been drafted into the infantry, and he would likely be on the battlefront in Europe by the end of the year. This was a heavy burden for both Keith and Rosalie. Although many other families faced similar situations, it still didn't ease the ache in their hearts. Keith departed for Camp Roberts in California for 4 months of heavy training before entering active duty. Keith and Rosalie wrote each other every night and sent photographs. He was assigned to a platoon known as the Rail Splitters, and he grew close to his fellow soldiers. In October 1944, they flew to Europe and began to work their way towards the front lines. He found time to write home a letter saying he was somewhere in Holland and that he was fine and that the family shouldn't worry. The platoon soon reached the battle zone and they encountered fierce fighting. Keith was forced to take the lives of opposing soldiers or be killed himself by the enemy. In one instance, a German sniper was hiding in a tree. He was slowly but surely killing several of the American soldiers. Keith took it upon himself to end the threat, and he shot the sniper from the tree. The man fell to the ground, and as Keith rolled him over, he saw a blond young man, no older than 16, who looked similar to his own brothers-in-law. It sickened him, but the experience possibly helped prepare him for the trials that lay ahead. He got along well with his fellow soldiers and was nicknamed the Utah Kid. On Thanksgiving Day, 1944, he wrote to say he was in his foxhole eating turkey out of a tin can, and that despite the snowy, cold conditions, the meal tasted quite good. His platoon moved forward, and December began with Keith becoming the platoon leader due to his own leader being killed. Sometime during the fighting, a shell hit a wall close to Keith. The impact sent fragments of the wall flying towards him, and one piece cracked his kneecap. It slowly healed, but it would occasionally give him trouble throughout the rest of his life. Keith's platoon chiseled foxholes out of the frozen soil, awaiting a German attack. On December 3rd, the attack came. Soon, only 7 platoon members were still alive. The German tanks rumbled towards the soldiers, with the tanks' drivers spinning their tracks, trying to crush the soldiers in the foxholes. Keith and his fellow soldiers ran from their foxholes to a large shell hole, hoping it would provide more protection. Then all they could do was lie low and hope to get undetected. One German tank rumbled past them, and they gave sighs of relief as it continued on. Then suddenly the tank stopped, shifted gears, and reversed to a stop right over the hole. The men were sure they would be killed. The tank began to grind its tracks, but the soldiers were able to avoid death. After a minute, a door in the belly of the tank opened up, and the Americans were pulled into the tank as prisoners of war. A prisoner of war. Keith was taken to a prison camp known as Stalag II near Frankfurt, Germany. The prisoners were placed in a wire enclosure without much protection from the elements. However, they did receive Red Cross packages which contained cigarettes. Good to know. Keith didn't smoke, and he would trade his cigarettes to an older woman who would come to the fence offering black bread. Keith and his fellow soldiers would also mix their sugar ration in with snow to make their own version of ice cream. Oh, dear. Before Keith had left Springfield, he had arranged for a bouquet of red roses to be delivered to Rosalie on Christmas Day. It was a welcome surprise to see the attached card in Keith's handwriting, written months earlier. However, the joy was diminished the next day when Rosalie received a notice that Keith was listed as missing in action. The postmaster had received the message on Christmas Day, but he decided to wait a day to deliver it rather than spoil the holiday for the family. Some family members feared Keith was dead, but his father Robert encouraged the family to never give up hope that his son was still alive. At about that time, Keith and his fellow prisoners were told they were being transferred to a bigger barracks. The rough winter had already taken a toll on the prisoners, and the long march to the barracks added to their physical troubles. Keith's feet had become frozen, and although he struggled to keep up with the group, he finally couldn't walk any further. Other soldiers tried to help him along, but the effort was slowing down the group. A German guard ordered the men to leave Keith along the side of the road and let him die. However, fellow prisoner George Wells Hurt, known as Tex to his fellow soldiers, refused the order. He found a wooden plank and told Keith to rest on the board, with his arms and legs dangling. Tex and another prisoner then carried Keith the rest of the way to the barracks. Once they arrived there, Tex rubbed Keith's feet with snow until feeling began to return, helping save his feet from permanent damage. Keith was always grateful to Tex for not only saving his feet, but also his life. By early 1945, the Allied forces were making great strides against their Axis foes. American bombers were flying far into German territory, making successful attacks on key cities and railroads. The Germans relied heavily on their railroads, and so they would send American prisoners out to repair damaged rails rather than risk the lives of their own people. Keith found himself patching together German railroads, facing the risk of being accidentally killed by his own country's bombers. It was difficult work, and combined with poor food and rough living conditions, prisoners began to lose weight and strength. Yet they faced death at the hands of the German guards if they didn't work, so they pushed on. The prisoners were transported to the work sites in train boxcars. The Germans would force several dozen prisoners into each boxcar, leaving little room to do much more than stand. Most of the soldiers were so weak that once the train began to move, they would slump down and try to sleep, lying on their sides on the hard wooden boxcar floor. There wasn't room to lie flat, and as the train moved along, the bumps and jostles would injure and irritate the soldiers. That's alliteration. Irritate the soldiers' shoulders, say that 5 times, and hips. Keith would always have trouble sleeping on his right side because of those boxcar injuries. One night, the prisoners were being held in a building and forced to sleep on a concrete floor. Suddenly, the German guards stormed in. They said a train had passed by and a fire had started in the weeds. They blamed the Americans and said someone needed to pay for what had happened. A guard rushed forward, pointed his gun at the prisoner lying next to Keith, and shot him to death. Keith later told Rosalie it was simply luck that it hadn't been him. The prisoners would sometimes find dead, rotting horses and other animals as they worked along the tracks. They gladly ate the animals, cooking the meat when possible. They considered this a step up from their prison meals, which were which were so meager the prisoners' cooks would mix sawdust into the bread dough just to make the ingredients last a little longer. In August 1945, Russian troops advanced towards Keith's barracks and released the prisoners. The Russians loaded them into trucks and took them to freedom. The worries weren't over for the Americans, however, as the celebrating Russian soldiers drank bottle after bottle of vodka. The joyful but drunk drivers somehow kept the trucks from going off the narrow, mountainous roads. Keith was released from prison weighing 95 pounds, down from the already lean 170 pounds he weighed before the war. After so many months as a prisoner, his hair had grown down past his shoulders, and he had a full beard. He was sent to an army hospital in Europe, where he put on weight fairly quickly. He was then transferred to a hospital in San Diego for 2 weeks. He resumed his army duties there, where he was given the responsibility of guarding Italian prisoners. Rosalie and the boys went there to stay with him during this time. He was released from the army on Thanksgiving Day 1945 and attended a banquet where he was served a big turkey dinner, which brought back memories of the 1944's Foxhole Turkey Dinner. Keith was awarded 2 Purple Hearts by the U.S. government for wounds he had suffered in battle, along with other honors for his acts of heroism during the war. I think we'll take a little break there.
Yeah, it's pure hell to listen to, isn't it? It's the chat was like, whoa, it's horrible, guys. We know. I think one of the reasons we are reading this is because we want to get inside this guy's head and see how he works and how he thinks. The next one I know we will be reading is 1 Foot in the Grave, and that one made me, I read most of that one. It made me want to throw my tablet across the room because he's so self-serving and all of the above and just has no regard for human remains and family members who've lost people. It's unbelievable to read. But I'm trying to figure out, Amy, why this is his autobiography, but it's about all this
because
people that aren't him. It starts out with his veil open.
The only thing I can think of is that it's because Chad hasn't really accomplished anything honorable, and so he's got to rely on his ancestors. And so because ancestry is so important in Mormonism, that he's like, because they share their DNA, I'm important too.
Yeah.
Maybe he's going to tell us later that he was actually, he was actually Keith. He was. And then he was reborn as Chad. And he can still taste that turkey dinner. And every once in a while, he rubs his tongue against the top row of his teeth, and he's like, "Ooh, I could taste metal, like phantom metal. Like my old gold tooth from my past life is still there." He's such a weirdo.
You can't forget the pitchfork. I mean,
oh my gosh!
It starts out with a family member raising in the middle of a storm. What the hell? My,
I think you were trying to destroy a lineage right there. Like, no, Chad, you weren't spared. someone has forsaken you for many generations. You're just like a cockroach and you won't fucking die. Oh. Yeah. I don't know. Sorry, I don't usually say
That
stuff like
was the angels trying to do their yes. That was the angels trying to do their work.
Oh, yeah?
No, it's hilarious. Hilarious. Do you want me to take in and read all of
Yes.
that mumbo? Yeah, definitely. Let me
It's like
figure out where you
it's like an 8th grader. Oh,
um
returning to civilian life on page 25.
okay, that's where we left off. Okay. Um oh no, Amanda, that's great. You guys should all go leave great reviews on this book. Not great. That's total sarcasm. So yeah, Amanda dropped a link for you to go leave a review for this. I would have much rather spent my money elsewhere, but hey, I thought it would be good content over here for us to all laugh at, because you know we like to dig in and find the humor where we can. So all right, here we go. What page am I on now? I don't know. It says there's 8 minutes left in this chapter, but we're 14% of the way done with this book. So if that tells you anything about how lengthy these books are not, they're very much, I said in one of my comments earlier that I ordered Melanie Gibbs, Feeling the Fire. I think that's what it's called. I don't know. It's sitting over there on my table. That book is no thicker than like a first grader or second grader's Junie B. Jones book. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely yeah. Yeah, all these self-proclaimed prophets. It's and we're those kind of people, like, as horrible as it is to read, we want to read it because we want to see what kind of mindset is going on here. So, all right, let's move on to this next part here. Returning to civilian life. When he returned to Springville, Keith adjusted quite easily back to civilian life. Keith joined his brothers Theo and LeVar in their new Daybell Lumber Company. They formed a logging camp at Soapstone Basin in the, excuse me if I pronounce this wrong, Uinta Mountains, and they would cut and haul pine logs from as far south as Schofield before bringing the lumber to Springville to process it. Keith shouldered the responsibility of running the camp and trucking the lumber down to the canyon. In the fall of 1946, Keith took his father Robert and Rosalie's brothers deer hunting up Hall's Fork and Hobble Creek Canyon. As they were hunting, a man in another hunting party shot at what he thought was a deer, but instead he hit Robert in the thigh. Imagine that. Robert cried out, "I'm hit! I'm hit!" The man came closer to look. Oh, the man came closer to look, but once he saw what he had done, he and his young son headed down to the mountain without helping. Can you guys imagine that? They didn't help. Keith and the others finally found Robert and laid him over the back of a horse. The wound was just below the hip, and despite the use of a tourniquet, it was bleeding heavily. They reached a man's jeep, put Robert in the back seat, and rushed him to the hospital. He had lost nearly 2 pints of blood, but thankfully, Keith, Theo, and LeVar all had the correct blood type to donate blood to their father. Robert's life was saved, but his leg had to be amputated. Robert never let the incident get him down, though, and he got along fine with a plastic prosthetic leg and cane. My father Jack joined Keith and Rosalie's family in 1947, and the older boys welcomed home their baby brother. Over the next few years, the lumber business thrived, and Keith began plans to build a larger home for his growing family. A baby girl named Judy was born in early 1951. Joe, was it a potato gun? Oh gosh, you guys should get awards for these comments because some of them are just
Oh dear.
crack me up. Hold on one second, guys. Okay, I gotta scroll past these family pictures. An
Oh
unthinkable tragedy strikes. Oh, did I miss something?
no, I have to mute and step away. Helen
Okay.
Keller's throwing a fit. I don't know what's going on. Hold on one second. Go ahead.
Okay, you're
I'll
fine.
catch
You're
you.
fine.
I'll catch up with you.
All right. All righty. An unthinkable tragedy strikes. Keith began August 9th, 1951, at home in Springville, awakening from what he called the best night's sleep I had ever had. He had traveled to Springville the previous afternoon. He and another man, had each shot at a deer that day at the lumber mill, and when one of his employees began to feel ill, Keith offered to take him home. Since he now had a deer he wanted to drop off to Rosalie anyway. Sorry, guys, this is hard to read because it's self-published and it's crap. So if I stumble along, blame it on Chad, please. Keith headed back up to Soapstone Basin, arriving at his employees prepared to lift a large diesel engine off the back of an Army flatbed with a smaller A-frame truck. Before Keith arrived that day, the smaller truck had actually tipped over on the first try and had torn apart the driveline. The men had repaired the truck and were preparing for another attempt when Keith reached camp. As they continued the project, Keith chatted happily with the men, telling them how Rosalie had dressed Judy in a beautiful white dress the night before, and Keith said seeing his young daughter dressed so beautifully had made it well worth the trip. They got the engine off the truck, and it was now 3 p.m. Keith suggested they call it a day and go cook up a big meal down at the cabins. It had been a long day for the men, and they eagerly climbed into the A-frame truck. In their haste, they neglected to drag a log behind the vehicle, a common practice which served not only to bring one more log down the mountain, but also helped in the braking. Another man took the wheel, and Keith hopped into the passenger seat. The truck didn't have doors, just a windshield and a rollover bar. The driver took a short but steep road back to the cabins, and they started down the hill. The truck's driveline broke loose again. The truck sideswiped a tree, and the driver steered toward a small hill to stop the truck. As the truck left the road, Keith was thrown to the ground. The truck's back right tire rolled over him, crushing his chest. His fellow workers made their best efforts to revive him and get him breathing, but to no avail. Keith was taken from this earth and returned to his heavenly home. His death at age 32 stunned the family and community. After proper care at Berg Mortuary, Keith's body was taken to his home and placed in the living room, where family and friends could pay their respects and offer sympathy. As was the tradition, a light was left on near the casket throughout the night. On the morning of August 13th, Keith's funeral was held at their church. The chapel was filled to capacity, and dozens of additional mourners filled the basement where they could hear the service. Following the funeral, the procession traveled south about a mile to the Springville Evergreen Cemetery, where Keith's body was laid to rest with full military honors on a sloping hillside with a beautiful view of the valley. On December 16th, 1952, Rosalie and the children traveled to the Salt Lake Temple, where Rosalie and Keith, through proxy, received their endowments and were sealed for eternity. Then the children were sealed to their parents, preparing for the day when the family would once again be reunited. So Keith died. Do you guys hear that in the back?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, hold on. I got to take care of a teenager really quick. But
That's okay.
hold 1 second.
I find it, sure. I find it rather ironic that Keith's body was laid to rest with full military honors on a sloping hillside. The sloping hillside was really the little, I don't know, catalyst in his death because they didn't have the log. But he did get a beautiful view of the valley, I guess. I don't know. I don't know why he's writing about all of this.
I thought it was interesting that Keith and Rosalie were sealed in the temple after Keith was dead.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That too. I'm counting how many times I see the word sealed used differently.
Yeah.
Because Chad used sealed with his head.
Oh, good point, Annie. Murder, unseal a couple asking for a friend. That's funny. Okay.
Chapter 3. Son of a
Chapter
steelworker. During the commotion surrounding Keith's death and funeral, little 3-year-old
Sorry.
Jack. Whoops.
Oh.
What's going on? Did I start too soon? I'm sorry.
You're fine. Go ahead and read it.
Okay. All right. During the commotion surrounding
No, I was going to read it because you had read so much.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
It's okay. You can read it.
No, go. I'm going to
just stop halfway and I'm
Okay. All right. Good deal.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Son of a steelworker. During the commotion surrounding Keith's death and funeral, little 3-year-old Jack was feeling very confused. The night before, his father had lain in the front room without moving, and Jack had begged, "Daddy, wake up!" Life suddenly became very challenging for Rosalie and her children. They didn't have life insurance, and although her parents helped out as much as they could, Rosalie saved every penny to make ends meet. So, although my dad Jack had a rambunctious childhood filled with pranks and troublemaking, he made it through okay. Rosalie eventually married a fine man named Glenn Kirkwood, who worked for the Provo School District, and money wasn't so tight anymore. Dad's recreational outlet in life was his love for hunting and fishing. He also met a lovely young woman a year younger than him named Sheila Chestnut. They dated steadily throughout high school and even after Dad attended BYU. He was planning on serving a mission, but the events of the late 1960s sent my parents' lives in a different direction. The United States government held a draft lottery in which the draft order for American young men would be determined randomly based on their birthdays. Dad's birthday was one of the first ones selected, meaning it was certain he would be drafted and be assigned to ground warfare in Vietnam. A mission was no longer an option. The government was only allowing 2 missionaries per LDS ward to serve each year, and there were already several young men ahead of Dad on the list. After his World War II experiences, Keith had told Rosalie that if their sons ever had to fight in a war, that they should try to get in the Navy or the Air Force, where they would at least have a bed to sleep in at night. When Rosalie reminded Dad of that counsel, he decided to join the Naval Reserve. Dad learned he would be stationed in San Diego, California for at least 2 years. Mom's father, Guy, had served in the Navy in World War II and knew what Navy life could be like for a single sailor. He suggested they get married before Dad left for California. My parents followed his advice. Rather than being separated, they were married in the Logan Temple the summer after Mom graduated from high school. Then they headed to a new adventure in San Diego. Oh, here we go. This little segment is titled, "I Make My Earthly Debut." I was born for real. I was born a year later in Provo, Utah during Dad's 2-week shore leave. How convenient. My parents scheduled the shore leave to coincide with my due date and traveled to Utah so I could be bored among family members. But my due date passed, and then another week slipped by. I still wasn't budging, though, and Dad needed to return to California in a few days. Dad finally asked Mom to go for a bumpy ride with him up in the mountains to see if it would jolt me into action. It was a little risky, but it worked. I was born on the next day. I'm just glad my birthplace wasn't Hobble Creek Canyon. I was given my baby blessing at Grandma Rosalie's home, and when we headed back to California, and then we headed back to California. We lived in a small apartment in National City. Dad was gone to sea for long stretches of time, so Mom and I would drive around Southern California in our little Volkswagen Bug and see the sights. I'll let you. You want to take a return to Utah?
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to read this. Okay. A return to Utah. When Dad's service in the Navy ended, we moved back to Springville. Dad was offered a job at Geneva Steel in the coke plant, where they turned coal into pure carbon called coke that was used in the steel-making process. It was a tough, dirty job, but my brother Paul had joined the family, so Dad did what he needed to do to support us. Dad was soon elected by Geneva to complete an electrician apprenticeship through Utah Technical College. So during the mid-1970s, he worked full-time, went to school all day Saturday, and squeezed in time for homework. He often had to work graveyard shifts, so he put a small cot in our cold concrete cellar and would sleep there during the day because we were so noisy. As a young child, I didn't understand how brutal his schedule was, but he graduated with straight A's and was promoted to a much better job as an electrician. As part of his work duties, Dad would go out at 2 a.m. and check various pieces of electrical equipment. His usual route included walking down a set of railroad tracks that went through a tunnel. This tunnel went under a building where coke was loaded into railroad cars. One night, Dad walked about 30 feet into the tunnel when he heard a voice say, "Don't go through there." Ooh. So his dad heard angels too, huh? He stopped for a second, thinking he was just being spooked. After all, it was an eerie place to walk around alone in the middle of the night. He laughed at himself, but only walked a few feet farther when a louder voice repeated, "Don't go through there." He stopped again, but told himself to not be so nervous. Then a loud voice said, "Jack, don't go through there." This third warning scared him enough that he retraced his steps out of the tunnel entrance and instead used the asphalt road that paralleled the tunnel. He reached the other end of the tunnel and walked back onto the railroad rails. Just then, there was a tremendous crash behind him. A thick cloud of coke dust hit him and he couldn't see anything. I wonder if he hit his head. You know, when he couldn't see? Is that where Chad got that from? It took a minute for the dust to clear. Then he saw a 40-foot long conveyor belt system with all of the structural steel supporting it. It had fallen from 20 feet above the ground. It landed on the tracks where he would have been walking if he hadn't followed that prompting. Company investigators discovered that a large cable that had been supporting the equipment for 30 years failed at that moment. Dad felt his father Keith was watching over him to save his life. Over the years, Dad continued to work his way up through ranks at Geneva Steel, eventually becoming a general manager of the coke plant. It wasn't a fun place to work, and the co-workers could often be tough to work with. But throughout the years, I've met many men who work with my dad, and they universally praise him for being such a good boss. Changing priorities. Dad was active in the church as a teenager, and as I mentioned earlier, he had planned on serving a mission. However, as he juggled his many responsibilities at the time in his life, he didn't make it to church very often. Sunday was Dad's only free day all week, and he sometimes relaxed by going hunting or fishing while Mom took us Well, Mom took us to church. Apparently, I had noticed because when I was 5 years old, I asked Mom, "Why doesn't Daddy come to church?" Mom shared my question with Dad, and he realized it was time for him to fully commit to church activity. He began reading the Book of Mormon and had a very sacred experience that he holds close to his heart. He made the commitment to attend church each week. That was a turning point in my life as well. It meant a lot to me to have Dad sitting in sacrament meeting with us. He was soon called to serve as the teacher's quorum advisor, and he had an immediate positive influence in the lives of several young men. They are still his close friends 40 years later. Let's see. Chapter 4. I was wrong. I thought we were already on chapter 5. Early experiences.
Can I just say there's a picture of Chad as a child, and he looks like the kid from The Shining.
Yeah, he does.
I mean, he's exactly like, we have to post it because it's
We
hilarious.
will, you guys. I think we're going to probably post all the pictures out of this book because Chad actually looks a lot like his father as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but the Shining picture is uncanny. It definitely looks like the kid from The Shining. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, chapter 4. Early experiences. Oh boy, here we go. My first encounter with death came in 3rd grade when my classmate Randy Perkins was helping his brother dig a cave in the foothills above town. The cave collapsed on him, and he suffocated before his brother could get him out. It was quite a shock to me and our entire school. They said Randy was now in heaven, but I didn't really understand what that meant. Death became a scary topic to me. Sports became my main focus. Our neighborhood was filled with good athletes, and when we weren't playing in organized city leagues, we were playing pickup games. It really was a small town, simplistic upbringing, and thankfully it kept us out of any real trouble. I was a year or two younger than most of the neighbor boys, so I had to continually improve my game to keep up with them. I played t-ball as an 8-year-old, and Dad was the coach. I played first base, and we won every game. My first year in Mustang League came to a screeching halt for me early in the season. I tried to score from third on a wild pitch. The catcher grabbed the ball and rushed back to tag me. So I slid awkwardly and banged my knee hard against the corner of home plate. My knee was tingling, so I pulled up my pant leg and nearly fainted at the sight. I had cut my knee to the kneecap. Then I bent my knee in fright, splitting the skin to the back of my knee, exposing the muscles and tendons as well. It was quite gory, but it wasn't bleeding. Dad had been coaching third base, and he hurried over to me. He took one look at it, scooped me up, and carried me to our truck before speeding to Utah Valley Hospital in Provo. It took 80 stitches to close the wound, 40 deep inside the knee and another 40 outside. The doctors gave me a leg brace and wrapped it up tightly. They told me to stay off of it and to not even bump it for at least a month. Well, a week later at my grandparents' home, we had a 4th of July party, and my cousins were playing kickball. I couldn't resist playing, and I fell directly on my injured knee. The impact with the ground tore out all of those stitches. I rolled over and watched the gauze around my knee instantly turn bright red. My cousins all freaked out. And then it was essentially a repeat of the first time, with Dad rushing me to the car and hurrying me to the emergency room again. Mom sat with me this time in the back seat, applying cloths to my knee, but it just kept bleeding. I lost a lot of blood, and the skin was badly damaged from the stitches ripping out. I was now under strict orders to stay on the couch for the rest of the summer. This was in early June, and I dreaded the long summer ahead of me. Can I just point out that he said this was in early June, but this second injury happened at a 4th of July party? Just
Well,
something I'm noticing here.
He's never been a friend of the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so this was in early June, and I dreaded the long summer ahead of me. Thankfully, my Aunt Sue Creer brought me a couple of Hardy Boys books. I read those two books and got hooked on the series. Over the next year, I read every Hardy Boys book in print, and also read the entire Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators series. The knee injury was horrible, but it allowed me to develop a love of reading, which I might not have, I'm sorry, which I might not, he can't write, you guys. This is just the simple truth. He should have wrote, which it might not have happened if I'd been playing sports all summer. Once I healed up, I began making regular visits to the Springville Library. And over the years, I've read hundreds of novels. All of this reading sparked a desire within me to give writing a try. Eek. Ooh. In fourth grade, I hand wrote a short novel entitled The Murder of Dr. J and His Assistant. My teacher, Mr. Busham, really liked it, and he had a school employee type it up. It was a fun story, despite the gruesome title, and they put it in the school library so my friends could check it out to read. I even received a commendation letter from the Nebo School District Superintendent. I suppose it was a foreshadowing of my future career. He based his future book writing career on an elementary writing, which makes complete sense.
About murder.
About murder, yes, yes. Okay. This picture of his novel is actually in our Facebook group. I posted this a while ago and asked people if they thought it was strange that he was so young writing a murder novel. Okay, the next part. Babe Ruth Jr. By the next summer, my knee was fully recovered, although I had a nasty scar that I still carry. I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder about the way the previous season had ended. Plus, I had grown a lot and was one of the biggest kids in the league. I was used to playing with the older neighbor boys, so this season almost seemed too easy. To top it off, Mom offered me a silver dollar for every home run I hit. I didn't need the extra motivation, but I wasn't going to turn her down either. It admittedly got a little ridiculous. The baseball fields we played on fences, didn't have outfield fences, so all I had to do was hit a long line drive between the outfielders, and I would circle the bases before they even grabbed the ball. Some coaches tried to pitch around me, but I'd sometimes chase a bad pitch and still crush it. I ended up with 38 silver dollars in 10 games, and I definitely needed some humbling. Don't worry, the Lord had a plan in mind. Over the next 3 years, I noticed how other kids were really sprouting up. At first, I didn't think much about it, but then it dawned on me I had hardly grown since that memorable baseball season. I'd been just over 5 feet tall that year, and now entering seventh grade, I was the same height. My grandma Rosalie was only 4'11", and my dad is 5'9" on a good day. So I realized my fate as a short person might be sealed. I continued to play I continued to play sports, but I certainly wasn't the head of the class anymore. Little did I know that my grade contained the greatest collections of athletes Springville has ever seen. Our middle school coach told us we would be lucky if one player from our grade played college football. But from that group of about 150 boys, we had 14 college athletes and one NFL quarterback, who I will discuss later. Matt nearly gets shot. Matt is actually the brother that is estranged from Chad. Matt is the brother who's married to Heather, and Heather published that note yesterday. We put a couple videos in our group about the note that Heather Daybell sent to court TV. So this might be interesting here. Dad would often take me hunting with him. During the pheasant hunt of 1980, I was the only child old enough to actually shoot a gun, but my younger brothers, Paul and Matt, had begged to come too. We loaded the hunting dogs in the truck, then my brothers and I piled into the cab. However, Dad was still in the doorway. Boys, aren't we forgetting something? Come back in and let's have a family prayer, he said. We all knelt down around the couch and listened as Dad prayed that we would be protected that day during our hunt. Following the prayer, we drove to an area west of Genola, Utah, and began walking slowly through a field, waiting for the dogs to scare up some pheasants. I loaded in a shell and excitedly waited for a pheasant to fly up. Paul and Matt trailed behind Dad and me. We came to a ditch, and Matt ran ahead and jumped across fast. He landed on the other side and scared up a rooster pheasant in the process. I quickly put the gun to my shoulder and got the pheasant aligned in my gun sight just as Matt stood up on the other side of the ditch. His head was only a few feet from the end of my barrel. In my excitement, I hadn't noticed him. All I heard was my dad and Paul shouting, "No, Matt, no." It was too late. I pulled the trigger. We all heard the gun click, but the shot was not fired. Dad dropped to his knees in shock while we stood in silence. Finally, Dad stood and took my gun. He popped the shell out of the chamber and examined it. The shell's primer, which is hit by a hammer to spark the gunpowder, was deeply indented. The gun should have fired and Matt should have been killed instantly. We prayed again in that field, thanking the Lord for preserving Matt's life and for fulfilling Dad's humble prayers earlier that morning. All right, let's take a break for a moment there, because that's kind of deep.
Yeah.
These two brothers are strange now, and they have been for quite some time, and Chad almost killed Matt when he was a kid. That's insane. That is absolutely insane. Annie, you have a point. Maybe Chad's first murder attempt? You have to wonder, right?
Yeah, you do.
You have to wonder if this guy has been thinking about murdering and killing people his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since his first book that he wrote and the self-proclaimed writer. Yeah. I'm disturbed by this. I don't know. Wow. Okay, let me take a drink and
You want me to pick up or you want to keep going?
I'll keep going on this part. There's only a couple minutes left in this chapter.
Okay. All right.
8th grade troubles. If Matt had died, it would have really sent me into a tailspin because by the time I started 8th grade at the junior high, I was basically mad at the world. The friends I had previously walked to middle school with now took a different route to the junior high, and it felt like I didn't have any friends. In my woodshop class, I became the target of a bully. He sat right next to me, and whenever the teacher left the room, this kid would just pound his fist into my shoulders and back. I finally told the teacher what was happening, and he moved the kid away from me, but my self-esteem was pretty low. One day that spring, I was slowly walking home across Memorial Park after school, and I saw a honeybee pollinating a dandelion. I peered at it for a moment, then smashed it with my shoe.
What
I spotted another one,
the hell?
then another one. Yeah. Apparently, he was taking his anger out on honeybees after
no,
his
he was
failed
trying
attempt
to
at
destroy
killing
the
his
world in 8th grade. That's why we have a bee problem now, Chad, you sick piece of shoe cheese.
We can definitely blame the bee problem or the lack of bees that is a problem
It is.
on Chad Daybell.
I'm starting a movement.
We can. We should start a petition
It'll
about
be
that.
all the buzz.
He should be charged. Yeah. I spotted another one, then another one. I got a strange satisfaction from it. I kept count, and after about a half hour, I had killed 120 bees. Then, as I was about to step on another bee, a masculine voice shouted in my ear, "Hey, stop it! Leave them alone." If there's any time that I believe God was talking to Chad, it was this time. Because
he should have
you know
told the
he
bees to sting his nasty
I
little
know.
behind.
I
His
thought
his
you were gonna say something else.
he should have like stung him where it was sealed.
Oh gosh. Oh, sealed back up that part of his head that never closed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I jumped back and looked around, but there wasn't anyone in sight. I was really shook up because the man had sounded really angry. I walked in a circle for a minute, trying to make sense of it. Finally, I realized that maybe an angel was fed up with me killing God's innocent creatures.
You
I
think?
wish Chad would have, carried this into his adulthood and into his middle-aged life. And
Well, I mean, if the bees were zombies, it'd be a whole nother story.
right.
It's gross.
That incident helped me realize how pathetic I had become. We can agree, Chad. We can agree. And I decided to start making some better choices.
What happened
Oh
to
boy.
that plan?
Good
Oh.
Lord.
Oh dear.
Amy gets an exciting chapter called Finding My Religion, you guys.
Woohoo. Chapter 5. Finding My Religion. I had been ordained a deacon the previous year, but I really didn't study the gospel. I had received some handheld electronic sports games for Christmas, and that's how I spent most of my time after school. Then came the bee chastisement. I'd never been yelled at by an unseen voice before, and I didn't want it to occur again. I started setting some goals. Don't kill any more bees. No, I'm kidding. One goal was to read the Book of Mormon. My deacon's quorum advisor had encouraged me to read it, so I finally opened up the book and slowly made my way through it. The Isaiah chapter in second, I don't know how to say this, I think it's Nephi, really baffled me, but I pushed forward. Once I reached the book of Alma, I was really enjoying the story. Interestingly, I had started reading non-LDS religious books from the library at the same time. I was still learning about the doctrines of the gospel, and I wasn't sure how everything fit together. I checked out a book from the library that talked about reincarnation and past lives, and I can remember the dark feelings the book generated in me. I knew the spirit was telling me, this is false. I returned the book and focused solely on finishing the Book of Mormon. I knew we would be studying it in ninth grade seminary, so I figured I would at least be ahead of the class. When I finished reading the Book of Mormon, I wanted the spiritual confirmation that the prophet Moroni talked about at the end of the book. I knew Joseph Smith had prayed in a grove of trees, so I went into a field behind our house with tall grass and prayed for a while, but all I got was a bunch of ant bites on my legs. Oh, a reason that maybe it needed to be more challenging.
Wait, I hope they were fire ants. Do they have fire ants in Utah, you guys? I don't know, but
I'm sure they did because they had a lack of bees. It became an unbalanced biosphere.
that's karma. He killed the bees and got bit by ants. That's what
There,
he got.
that's true. True. A reason that maybe it needed to be more challenging. So during a rainstorm, I kneeled in the mud in the backyard and prayed for 20 minutes, but all I received was a good drenching. Deep down, I knew the book was true and felt good when I read it, but I suppose I expected something along the lines of a heavenly messenger appearing to me. Finally, one day, when I was praying in my bedroom, I got the impression to write in my journal. As I started to do so, the spirit rushed into the room. My chest was burning with confirmation in the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, and I was able to write my feelings down as this occurred. The Spirit was so powerful that I started crying. As I described the experience, I wrote, "Thank you, Heavenly Father. I know without a doubt that the Book of Mormon is true." Attending General Conference. That answered prayer was the beginning of my personal spiritual awakening. Later that year, one of my Aaronic priesthood leaders asked our quorum members if we would like to attend General Conference. He told us he knew how to get front row seats in the Salt Lake Tabernacle for the priesthood session and that we'd get to shake hands with the general authorities. He said it would require the sacrifice of standing in line for several hours, but he promised it would be worth it. On the first Saturday in April, we arrived at Temple Square at 9:30 a.m. and stood next to a certain tree near the the northeast corner of the tabernacle. Once the doors closed for the 10 a.m. session, our leader walked over and spoke to an usher at one of the side doors, who nodded and waved to us. That was it. We were the first ones in line for the priesthood session. We were able to take a few breaks and stretch our legs as long as most of our group stayed in line. We listened to the 2 Saturday sessions, and then at 5 p.m., the usher allowed us into the tabernacle. We were front and center, sitting only a few feet away from where general authorities would be seating facing us. At about 5:15, several of the general authorities came back into tabernacle. Rather than taking their seats on the stand, they came down into the congregation to greet us. It was wonderful to shake their hands and spend a few seconds conversing with each of them. The conversation that has struck with me the most was with Elder Bruce R. McConkie. I had only seen him give stern, loud talks that seemingly rattled in the pulpit. So I was a little intimidated, but when I told him where I was from, he gave me the biggest smile and said he loved visiting Springville. Once the apostles took their seats, the 70s did as well, and sitting directly across from me was Elder Angel Ebrea from Argentina, who had just been sustained as a general authority earlier that day. He motioned me toward him, so I stood up and shook his hand. He asked, "Is this your first conference?" I nodded, and he said, "I'm glad you're here. This is where the Lord wants you to be." Our Aaronic priesthood group made it a tradition to get to the front row for the next few conferences, and each time Elder Abrea would motion me to come forward and chat. It was like having a general authority pen pal that I would catch up with every 6 months. It was an exciting surprise to open the November 1981 Ensign magazine and see a photo of my friend Rob Barris and I talking to Elder Abrea. A change in perspective. A key turning point in my life came in 1982. I received my patriarchal blessing from Ray Cope, our stake patriarch. At that time, most teenagers were waiting until they were at least 16 before receiving their blessings, but I had a strong feeling that I should get mine at 14. Admittedly, the song "Only the Good Die Young" by Billy Joel had strangely affected me. Oh no. And I started wondering if I was going to die young because I was doing my best to live the gospel. Thankfully, the blessing made it clear I had a long, wonderful life ahead of me, and it was very comforting. It spoke about serving a mission, going to college, marrying a wonderful woman, and raising a strong family. It also mentioned spiritual gifts that would be made known to me later in life and that I would cultivate to bless the lives of others. It really gave me hope and opened my mind to life's possibilities. Because prior to that time, I fully expected to graduate from high school and then work at Geneva Steel until retirement. After all, Dad was following that route, and a lot of my relatives had as well. I had just assumed that I would be expected to become an electrician like my father. Around that time, I had asked him, "Dad, what if I don't want to become an electrician?" He chuckled a little and said, "I don't expect you to become one. Get good grades, go to college, and become whatever you want to be." His comment really surprised me. I'm definitely not mechanically minded, so I was greatly relieved. Dad was called to serve in our ward's high priest group leadership at around this time, and our family gathered at the Springfield stake offices for him to be ordained. Grandma Rosalie joined us, and I sat next to her a couple of rows back. On the other side of her was a vacant chair against the wall. As we waited for the stake president to arrive, I noticed Grandma kind of jump in her chair. She smiled slightly and looked toward the vacant chair. I turned and gave her a curious look, and she looked around a moment to see if anyone else was listening. Then she whispered in my ear, "Your grandpa Keith, excuse me, your grandpa Keith is sitting next to me." I looked over and I didn't see anything, of course. But a week or so later, I rode my bike over to Grandma's house and asked her about it. She told me that she felt his presence often and that he attended a lot of family events. She wasn't surprised that Grandpa Keith had been in attendance at Dad's ordination. At this time, Dad was trying to sort out in his mind how Keith had been killed. Dad had grown up thinking that the accident happened several miles away above the town of, I don't know how to say that, Kamas, Kamas. The members of the logging crew had told that story to Rosalie so she wouldn't have bad thoughts about the sawmill site in Soapstone Basin in the mountains. She, in turn, told the same story to Dad about Keith dying near Kamas. Since Grandma didn't know the real location, it allowed the family to still have picnics and reunions at the logging site without negative feelings. One summer, Dad took our family camping to the sawmill site. There was still a large sawdust pile there from the days of the logging camp, and while we played there, Dad took a short hike alone. He walked up the dirt road to the slope above the sawdust pile and looked at a place where they had loaded logs onto trailers. As he started walking back down the road to rejoin us, he started getting a strange feeling that this road was where Keith had died. He was very confused because it didn't match the story he'd always been told. The thought, my father died here, came stronger into his mind. As he walked down the hill to the spot where Keith had been run over, Dad was overcome with emotion. He felt so weak that he dropped to his knees. He knew this was the exact place his father had died. He knelt there crying for some time before finally gathering enough strength to walk back to our camp and tell us about his experience. Dad later asked his older brother Ray what he knew about the accident, and Ray confirmed it had happened at that spot. Another man who had been injured in the accident was still alive, and he also told Dad that it occurred there, along with other important details. Dad feels that Keith was there that day to help him better understand what actually happened, for whatever reason, even if it was just to let him know he was there helping when he can. Helping Milt Harrison. Two people I got to know quite well growing up were Milt and Leah Harrison, who lived around the corner from us. They had allowed us to play football and baseball in their big backyard over the years. Milt was confined to a wheelchair. He had developed polio as a young man, and now in his 80s, his legs had completely stopped working. One day, Leah called her home and asked if my parents and I could visit them. When we arrived, Leah broke into tears. She said Milt's strength was ebbing away, and she wasn't strong enough to lift him in and out of the bed by herself. Would it be possible for Chad to come help Milt each morning and night? Oh, bad idea. Would it be, would it be possible for Chad to come help Milt each morning and night? Leah asked. It will only take a few minutes, and I could pay you $1 a day. My parents felt good about it, but they left the decision up to me. I looked into Milt and Leah's eyes, and it was like seeing old friends. I nodded, and Leah clapped her hands. Thank you, she said. This will be such a blessing to us. That began a daily odyssey for me from age 14 until Milt's death when I was 17. I went each day before school to help him get dressed and into his wheelchair, and then we'd reverse the process each night. It would take about 10 minutes with each visit. When I started helping Milt, he didn't warm up to me very quickly. I think it had more to do with letting someone take care of him rather than anything to do with me. Right. I forever cracked his cold scowl, though, when I asked, "What was it like around here when you were a boy?" Over the next few years, I probably heard 1,000 different stories because Milt rarely repeated himself and would remember where he left off the day before. It was like stepping back into Springfield's history. Milt was born in 1900, and his grandfather owned the Harrison Hotel in Springfield's Main Street. This was long before the freeway system, so travelers would pass through each town along the Wasatch Front. The Harrison Hotel was considered a high-class institution, and many prominent people stayed there and ate in the hotel's dining room, whether they traveled by train or by wagon. As a young teenager, Milt would help out with the hotel chores, but his grandpa would make a point to introduce him to the famous visitors who would stop there. Milt felt honored to haul the luggage of prophets and apostles to their rooms. Milt told me he felt a special connection to Joseph F. Smith, who was the prophet at the time. Whenever the prophet spoke in Springfield, Milt did his best to be on the chapel's front row, and the prophet would make a point to shake Milt's hand. By this time, I had heard the story of Finity Daybell defending Joseph F. Smith in England, and it kind of blew my mind that both Finity and Milt had met President Smith. I realize now how fortunate I was to become friends with Milt. He provided me a link to the early days of the church and the rising generation doesn't have. Milt gave me a lot of advice about life. Some of it I heeded, while other times I just smiled to myself. For example, he and Leah hadn't gotten married until their late 30s, so he was pretty adamant that I didn't need to go on any dates until after my mission. Since I had to help Milt each night at 9 p.m., he did actually curtail my social life, but it was a blessing in disguise that helped keep me out of trouble. My friends were quite understanding, and they all got to know Milt and Leah and would substitute for me, excuse me, if our family went on vacation. It was an invaluable experience for me. Let me see. I can finish this section, I guess. A curious visitor in the, now I'm going to regret saying that. A curious visitor in the Manti, I hope I'm saying this right, in the Manti Temple. My mother's side of the family is also filled with humble church members who paved the way for me. At around the time I started helping Milt, my grandpa Guy Chestnut sat me down and told me an amazing story of what happened to him at the Manti Temple. It opened my mind to how our ancestors in the spirit world are very aware of what we are doing on earth. Life didn't start out easily for Grandpa. He was born in 1923 to Alma and Almira Chestnut in the tiny town of Teasdale in southern Utah. He weighed 13.5 pounds at birth. 3 weeks later, Almira passed away, and suddenly Alma was a single father with 6 children. The Euler family heard about Alma's predicament and asked if they could take in the motherless newborn. The Eulers were converts to the LDS Church and lived in Fruita, which is now inside Capitol Reef National Park. Their homestead is now gone, but it was at the base of a stone cliff that contains Native American petroglyphs and is a popular tourist spot. There's a sign that reads, Tyne Euler Place at that location. Guy attended the small one-room schoolhouse that is along Highway 24. There's a recorded message from a former school teacher who mentions a student putting a snake in her desk drawer, giving her a good scare, and that was him. He worked hard on the Euler farm and became a key part of their family. He even took their last name and was known as Guy Euler. When he reached ninth grade, he left the small school in Fruita and began attending at Wayne High in Bicknell. One day, the gym teacher brought in a man who had been a professional boxer to teach the boys to defend themselves. After demonstrating a few techniques, the boxer selected Guy to be his opponent. As they began circling each other, Guy faked with his left hand, then knocked the boxer to the ground with a solid right hand punch to the face. That quickly ended the day's boxing demonstration. Guy made the varsity basketball team his junior year, but as the team began its preseason schedule, Guy became very ill. He woke up one day to discover he was paralyzed from the waist down. The doctor diagnosed the illness as polio, and Guy was told he would never walk again. But through faith, prayers, and determination, he was on his feet in 3 months. He was using crutches at first, but he soon discarded them. During this time, Guy became acquainted with a pretty dark-haired girl named Flora Chappell. After a year of steady dating, they were married in 1943. World War II was raging, and 4 days after their marriage, Guy departed for 8 weeks of Navy boot camp. This was followed by an assignment on the USS Pocomoke, where he served as a medical corpsman. His ship traveled throughout the South Pacific and participated in every major military campaign there. He returned safely home and worked a variety of jobs. He owned his own long-haul truck, but eventually started painting houses to be at home. He developed his skills and became a leader in the industry where he was known for his honesty and hard work. He later expanded his operation and began building homes. An important moment in my grandparents' lives came during a visit to the Manti Temple in the late 1940s. As Guy and Flora were walking into the main hallway of the temple, a man approached who they'd never met. The man stepped in front of Guy and asked, "Who's your father?" "Al Chestnut," Guy replied. "I've seen your father," the man said. "You look like him." The man then smiled and asked, "Have you done your genealogy?" "No, I've had a hard time tracing my father's line," Guy said. The man nodded. "I know who can help you." The stranger then named a man in Helper, Utah, who would have the records they needed. Flora searched through her purse for something to write down the name on, and Guy turned to help her. When they turned back, the man was gone and the hallway was empty. In the split second they had taken their eyes off the man, he had disappeared. Guy rushed to the nearest doorway, but the stranger wasn't there. They wanted to thank him, but he wasn't anywhere to be found. No one in the temple recalled seeing a man matching his description. The man was dressed in a typical suit and didn't appear any different than any other men, but it seems a messenger from heaven had been sent to help Guy find his genealogy. This came as a surprise to Guy because up to that point in his life he had come to think of himself as an oiler. Guy contacted the man in Helper, and he found out a great deal of information on his ancestors. Guy and Flora were able to do their temple work for dozens of Guy's relatives and to trace his line back to the royalty of England. Without the prompting from this messenger, Guy may have never completed the temple work for his Chestnut ancestors. My grandparents had 5 daughters who all reached teenagehood in the 1960s. They endured it well, and that alone should assure them direct admission to the celestial kingdom. The daughters all got married within a few years of each other, and Grandpa became a second father to his 5 new sons-in-law. I know Grandpa's influence played a huge role in helping my parents establish a happy marriage. He was the patriarch to a rapidly growing group of grandchildren, and he made each of us feel special. Both Grandpa and Grandma have passed away, but I know they are busy in the spirit world. Interestingly, after their passing, my mom suddenly became very interested in her family line, and she has since done the temple work for thousands of ancestral cousins. She knows her parents are inspiring her to find these people. I'm sorry that was a little rough. I think my voice is going.
It's all good.
Chad is sucking the life out of me. He's soul draining.
Oh boy, sucking you into that portal, huh?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay,
No.
good.
Yeah.
As long as you're safe in the portal.
Yeah, I'm portal protected. I'm good.
His books are hard to follow because he bounces from 8th grade back to the polio pandemic and
back to the 1960s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chad needs a little thing called Elements of Style, the MLA book, and maybe how to write an outline.
Maybe he can learn that in prison.
Aww.
He can use taxpayer dollars to better his writing skills. Because I'm sure he'll write some books in prison.
Well, maybe some weird ass angel can come and smack him in the head and do it for real this time. I think I'd be better with that. So after he's convicted.
Yeah. Margaret Maddox should have a good
Bubba or Max or it doesn't matter. Maybe he can be stung to death by bees or eaten alive by ants.
So funny. So funny. Okay, so the next chapter. Oh, you guys still hanging in there? Everybody good? We know it's hard to take in or hard to listen to. It's hard to read. So you're right, Aerodo. Every great writer had a great editor. Chad was his own editor. had his own book company. So
Go figure.
that's how. All right, chapter 6. Gaining my footing in life. My life began to improve the summer after 8th grade, even though my best friend was an 83-year-old man. I started growing taller again after a 2-year pause. Even now, I had a lot of catching up to do. A crucial point in life came on the first day of 9th grade. During PE class, as we listened to the coach talk, I noticed a tall boy that I'd met briefly at a family reunion a couple of weeks earlier. All I knew was that his name was Les. He'd just moved to Springville from Texas, and he was my mom's cousin. As the class ended, I saw him go out into the hallway and turn left. My next class was to the right, but I had a strong impulse to chase him down. He was walking pretty fast, but I caught up to him and tapped him on the back. "Hey, how's it going?" I asked. Les turned to look at me, and a wave of relief passed over his face. "Hey, you're Chad, right?" "Yeah, we have PE together." We agreed to go to my house to play basketball after school that day, and that began the most important friendship of my life. It turned out Les was very good at basketball, but even better, he was very spiritual. We had both been looking for a friend to help us maintain our standards, and the Lord brought us together. Les had a nice Datsun 280Z that we would cruise around town in. People probably thought we were looking for girls, but in reality, we were discussing the plan of salvation. We were basically gospel nerds, but it was great. We encouraged each other to read the Book of Mormon once a year until our missions, and we did. Once basketball season started, Les became a bona fide superstar on the court. He started on Springville High's varsity team as a sophomore and was a key part of the team's run to the state championship game. His junior year performance was even better, and by the time we were seniors, he had named to several all-state teams. He had been named to several all-state teams. The great thing about Les is he's a better person than he is a basketball player. Hey, what a great way to throw a low blow at your best buddy there, huh? Oh boy. Our friendship had nothing to do with his athletics, and I think hanging out with me, helped him keep the basketball hoopla in perspective. We were able to do a lot together after we returned from our missions, and even now we can get together and talk just like old times. Everyone deserves to have a best friend like Les Chappell, and fortunately, I do. An end to my sports career. As I mentioned earlier, our class of 1986 was loaded with athletes. Scott Mitchell would lead us to Springville's only undefeated football season. He would go on to have a great success as a quarterback in college and in the pros. Les and Scott were legitimately famous in our sports crazy small town, but they always kept their heads on straight. It was an honor to grow up with both of them. As for my own sports career, I had given up on football, and I wasn't good enough to make the basketball team, but I had continued playing on the high school baseball teams. During my junior year, I was in the junior varsity. I was the JV starting center fielder. Why was he playing JV in his junior year? That's weird. Anyways, I was the JV starting center fielder, and I started out hot, hitting .750 through the first few games. I eventually cooled off, but then they moved me up to the varsity team for the state playoffs. We reached the championship game at the old Dirks Field in Salt Lake, but our pitchers were worn out and the American fork was hammering us. The game was basically over, so our coach let me bat in the last inning. I got up with 2 outs and hit a hard one-hopper to their shortstop. He threw me out by a step at first base, and suddenly I was surrounded by the American Fort players as they celebrated their state championship. I fought my way through them and got ready for a sad bus ride home. Springville would win the state title the next year, but I wasn't on the team. Why? Because I had jumped off a cliff at Flaming Gorge the summer before my senior year, and suddenly sports just didn't hold my interest anymore. It had to be because his veil was split open, right, when he made that jump? That's my guess. An eventful senior year. One of the beneficial side effects of nearly dying at Flaming Gorge was I became more outgoing. I was appointed as a student council treasurer, and it kept me so busy that I didn't focus much on my recent near-death experience. We had a slightly crazy group on the student council, and we had one goal for our assemblies: keep the students entertained. Every assembly turned into a major production. My favorite skit was when I performed as a rock star and jumped off the stage into the crowd. Oh my gosh. I played a major role in the homecoming assembly since my dad had graduated exactly 20 years earlier. He and I did a skit where he acted like a senile old man, and I was supposed to slap him back to reality. We had rehearsed the slap, but when I slapped him in the assembly, I caught him just right, and it sounded really loud. I hadn't hurt him, but he played it up nicely and had the crowd wondering if he was going to punch me out. School success. My senior year, we had to write a technical writing essay on how to perform a certain task. I wrote mine on helping Milt with the catchy title of How to Put an Old Man to Bed. I took third place in the state and got to attend a fancy banquet in Salt Lake to receive a certificate. Milt was as proud as anyone. That essay was part of the reason I was named Springville High's Sterling Scholar in English, but I really didn't have the credentials to match the students from other schools. I was eliminated in the first round. It didn't help that at the end of my less than impressive interview with the judges, they asked if I had anything else to add. I shrugged and said, "Nope, that's about it." I graduated from Springville High School with high honors and really just had a fun time that year. I was awarded a 2-year full tuition BYU presidential scholarship, which was a great blessing. Trouble with the law. Like most teenagers, I still had a few episodes of stupidity. This one tops the list. One night, 3 friends and I were driving around a neighborhood where a sophomore girl was having a birthday party. One of the friends is now a prominent surgeon and wasn't really the instigator anyway, so I won't use his name. But the other 2, Darren and Chris, still love to tell the story and deserved the blame anyway. We began our adventure by throwing tomatoes and onions at the girls' house from a nearby school field. But we didn't quite have the arm strength. We could see our projectiles were only hitting the front lawn. The girls had noticed what was happening, and they came out to pick up the vegetables. This is unreal. I wonder if he threw any potatoes. One of the girls figured out where we must be. She came over toward the fence and called out, "You better stop, or her mom is going to make you regret it." That was the wrong thing to say to Darren and Chris. Before I knew it, oh my gosh, before I knew it, they had loaded the remaining tomatoes into Darren's Blazer, and we were driving slowly down that street. As we passed the house, Chris lobbed a big, juicy tomato at the front window, and it splattered perfectly. As we laughingly drove away, I figured we were done for the night, but Darren circled around and went past the house one more time. Suddenly, a car's headlights popped out in the driveway, and I could see the girl's mom in the in the driver's seat. Darren floored it, but she was right on our tail. For the next 15 minutes, she chased us all over southern Springville. We reached speeds of at least 70 miles per hour down residential streets, and there was more than one time we were on two wheels going around corners. I was in the back seat holding on for dear life while keeping an eye on the mom. She nearly wrecked 3 times trying to keep up before she finally backed off and disappeared. We couldn't believe that we escaped. We were now within a couple blocks of Darren's house. I thought I spotted a police car behind us, so Darren turned off his headlights and pulled into a vacant field. Our hearts dropped as the policeman pulled into the field and turned on his flashing lights. He just sat in his car and we stayed put too. Then we heard sirens coming from all over town. Within 2 minutes, there was not one, not two, but 6 police cars surrounding us. Until then, I didn't even know Springville had that many police cars. Each officer exited his car with a gun drawn and pointed at us. As they approached, one of the officers yelled, "Put your hands up where we can see them." We recognized the voice. It was one of our seminary teachers who worked nights as a police officer. We were doomed. He shined a powerful flashlight on each of our faces that then gave an irritated shout to his fellow officers. "Congratulations, guys. We've just captured the freaking Springville High Seminary Council." The next half hour didn't go too favorably for us. The officers lashed into us pretty good. We avoided actual arrest, but it would have been preferable to what came next. With a police car in front of us and behind us, we returned to the girl's house in Darren's vehicle. Her parents and the girls were waiting on the front lawn, and there wasn't a smile to be seen. The policemen motioned for us to get out, and then they led us to stand in front of the girl's parents. We each mumbled our apologies and kept our heads low, but her dad recognized me. He growled, "Daybell, what in the world were you thinking?" I didn't have an answer. Then he said, "Well, the girls cleaned up your mess. You better thank them." So we had to move down the line and apologize to the girls too. Finally, they let us slink away. The hardest part was still to come. It was now after midnight and my parents were asleep. I woke them up though and said, "You might hear something about me around town tomorrow." And what do we have here? More family pictures. All right, we're on to the next chapter. I'm going to look at comments for a minute because the raccoon wears the holy garments. Oh, you guys crack me up. Okay, so chapter 7 is called Freshman Frustration at BYU. Let me check something really quick. Okay. Milt passed away the summer after I graduated, and it left a fairly big void in my life. I was still only 17, so I worked for the Springville City Parks Department that summer, then arranged to attend BYU for a full year before serving my mission. When I started college at BYU that fall, I continued to live at home, but it was admittedly a lonely time. My friend Les Chappell had gone to Utah Valley State College on a basketball scholarship, so we really didn't cross paths too often anymore. I had other friends who were at BYU, but they were also very busy, and many of them left on their missions after the fall semester. I vividly remember walking slowly across the BYU campus during a January snowstorm and thinking, there isn't a soul on earth who cares what I'm doing right now. I knew that statement wasn't completely true, but at home it seemed life revolved around my other siblings' activities. And at BYU, I had taken general education classes, meaning I was seated with hundreds of students in large auditoriums where I rarely sat by the same person twice. My afternoons were usually spent studying so I could keep my scholarship. There were some cubicles tucked away on the fourth floor of the Harold B. Lee Library, and that's where I spent a lot of time when I wasn't in class. I actually preferred being on campus or at home because that's where I felt the safest. During the hectic pace of my senior year, the issue of my newly torn veil didn't bother me too much. But once in my life, sorry if you guys hear my kids in the background, but once my life slowed down the following summer, I realized there were people in another realm who were very aware of me. Some of them were friendly spirits, while others were definitely dark souls. They never approached me, but I was able to discern they were people who had lived in the area many years earlier. For some reason they had died, they didn't for some reason when they had died, they didn't go to the light. They had stayed behind on earth and now were stuck in limbo. If they got too close to me, the hair on my head would stand on end. I tried to ignore them because if I acknowledged them, they seemed to hang around a lot longer. I found it interesting that these spirits were congregated in cemeteries, abandoned buildings, or quiet areas. Most of the time they were wherever there was a lot of human energy they could feed off. I went to a high school basketball game that winter, and there were dozens of them in attendance. As I mentioned, I felt safe on the BYU campus, particularly in the old Joseph Smith building. It was hallowed ground that had a protective spiritual barrier against wandering spirits. Class opposites. My favorite class during the year was an advanced religion course on the Pearl of Great Price. I had read a fascinating book about the earth written by BYU professor Rodney Turner, and I jumped at the chance to take a course from him. The class consisted of 20 students, and most of them were married with 2 or 3 children. I later realized the class was probably required for a major such as Old Testament studies, but I thrived in it. Brother Turner could see I was soaking up this knowledge, and he would kindly spend a few minutes after each class answering my questions. His explanations helped me fit together God's eternal plan. I regret not telling him about my cliff jumping experience because I think he would have appreciated it. I saw his obituary in the newspaper in 2014, and I'm sure he's loving life in the spirit world. On the opposite end of the spectrum was my freshman math class. Somehow, my accident had made me even dumber when it came to math. It was as if my knowledge I had beyond basic multiplication had been erased. Early in the semester, we had an in-class test where you had to show your work, and I had studied hard, but after 20 minutes, I hadn't solved a single problem. I could envision my scholarship being ripped away because of my failing that class. As the minutes ticked away, I was on the verge of a panic attack. I finally walked up to the professor and asked him to come out into the hall with me. Once we were alone, I started crying. I don't know what's wrong with me, I said. I can't even do one problem right. He was a gruff, older gentleman, and he could have easily said, "Tough luck, kid." Instead, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "It'll be okay. Go ahead and take it home tonight and work on it. Use your book if you have to, then bring it to me in the morning." I was stunned. I hadn't expected that kind of compassion from him. I thanked him profusely, hurried back into the classroom to grab my backpack, then headed home. Even with help from the book, I only got an 88. but it sure beat getting a 0. That experience has come to my mind many times in recent years where it has been my turn to give someone a break. There's more to life than Utah Valley. I dated a nice girl a few times that I'd met in my Communications 101 class, but we really didn't click. She was from Florida, and on our final date, she said, "Sorry, but you need to get out and see the world. There's more to life than Utah Valley." That girl probably escaped death, if I'm being honest. I was slightly offended. I mean, I'd been to Disneyland 3 times with my family, and one time I walked about a mile into Tijuana, Mexico. Then there was the trip to the Four Corners Monument, where I stood in 4 different states at the same time. What did she mean I hadn't seen the world? I was about to find out. Submitting my mission papers early. I was receiving strong promptings that February to submit my mission papers early. The standard practice at the time was to wait until 3 months before your 19th birthday to start working on them, which would have been in mid-May for me. That felt way too late, so Dad and I talked to our bishop about it. The bishop was very reluctant to even consider it, saying he'd never seen anyone leave early, but he agreed to give it a try. We took care of all the interviews and medical requirements, including removing 4 of my wisdom teeth, and we sent the papers to church headquarters in March. The bishop was pretty blunt with me that he felt that this had been an unnecessary rush. He expected my papers to be returned and that he'd have to resend them at a later time. I just kept quiet because I knew it had been the right thing to do. BYU's semester ended and I started working at the Parks Department again while I waited for my mission call. I came home for lunch one day in early May and Mom met me at the door. She was acting frantic. "What's going on?" I asked. She shoved a big white envelope into my hand. "It's your mission call. Call your dad at work. Do you know how hard it has been for me to wait?" My mom was doing a nervous little dance around the kitchen as I got Dad on the phone. Then I tore open the envelope and read, "You are assigned to labor in the New Jersey Morristown Mission. You should report to the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah on Wednesday, July 15th, 1987. You will learn the discussions in Spanish." Mom let out a scream and I couldn't quite believe it because I had never thought of New Jersey as a possible destination. I knew it was one of the 13 original colonies, but that was it. Then Mom looked at the reporting date again. "July 15th, that's only 2 months away. We need to get busy." We called the bishop and he was surprised I'd received my call so early, but he was very happy for me. Only later did I realize the full significance of the promptings to send my papers in early. At the time of my call, my mission didn't even exist yet. It was officially formed on July 1st, 1987 as a division from the New York mission. This put me among the first group of Spanish-speaking missionaries called to the mission. We were going to take the gospel into some rough urban areas where it had never been preached. Excitement was just around the corner. All right, that's the end of that chapter. I gotta check my phone here, and I'm sure Amy will come back on.
I'm here. We've got a funny crowd.
Are they funny? I can't watch the chat when I'm reading, but
I know I can't either. It's hilarious though. They're so funny. They're so funny. Manda, tortillas are not. Oh yeah, they are for tacos. That's why I said empty. Because I wouldn't want to waste a good taco on Chad.
I hope he gets spam tacos in jail.
Spam. Spam tacos. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Chad goes to the big city. Oh, the comments, you guys.
They're hilarious.
Oh, too funny. Too funny. So,
Dios mío. Yeah, well,
they are.
he believes in something.
Yes. Yeah.
He believes in something. Yeah, they're still stuck on the.
I promise when we read. What are they stuck on down there?
The bees. They're stuck on the bees. They're like, serial bee killer. That was disturbing. I worked for this woman that was like, this was years ago. She was just insane. Absolutely insane. And I remember she told me this story once about, she was like, when I was little, my mom owned this makeup store. And she's like, and I used to have to go to work with her during the summer. And she's like, and I would find these ants and I would put them in puddles and I would hold them under and then I would save them. And that's when I knew I would do great things. And I was like, okay. like, you drowned them. She's like, but I saved them. I was their savior. And that's how I knew I was going to do great things, Amy. And I was like, oh, yeah, I totally get it. I'm just like, step away quietly. Never go near water with her. Yes, fossil friendly. He one day stomped bees for no reason. 120 of them. He got great joy out of it, apparently.
He did. And then he heard a very, very loud voice telling him to stop.
He hears a lot of voices.
So,
and it's interesting. Like, I'm not going to go down like a psychology path, but it is interesting that somebody said that's right about the age that schizophrenia sets in. That he starts hearing all these voices. Yeah. Because it's usually in males in their late teens to mid 20s. That's kind of the range. Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just can't with him. Like,
yeah, Melissa Seegers, he actually counted them, and that's bizarre. Who counts how many bees they're killing?
Yeah, he admits he counts them too. He's like, I counted them. I got up to 120, and then I heard a voice.
Yeah.
It took 120 for the voice to kick in. Good Lord.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
crazy.
For English, marque dos. Were you not listening in the right language? I don't know. On the edge of a basket case. On the edge of a casket case is what it is.
Well, just wait till after we get through this book and we read One Foot in the Grave. That one, I can honestly say that book pisses me off. That is one that I read the majority of, and I was like, oh my gosh. He just, ugh.
Well, you get an inkling of how he thinks about the deceased, even when he talks about, oh my gosh, Keith. The way he was like, once he was prepared, he was placed in the living room. It's like, ugh, I don't know. But I know you've told me some of it, and it's far worse than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty,
Yes, Car Guy 72. It's his Gravedigger story. We're not talking about monster trucks. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, at one point in that book, he laughs about.
Oh my gosh, I just had an image. Have you ever seen The Green Mile? Have you ever?
Yes.
Okay. So Chad is going to go down in the jail cell without the spiritual experience of those insects coming out of the guy's mouth. He's going to be the one attacked by the insects, by the bees. Do you remember that?
The
bees would
Bee's
come out.
Revenge.
The bee's revenge. Yes. Bee aggressive.
Maybe
The
Murder
bee
Hornet.
aggressive. What's Chad's favorite musician?
Drew Stevenson. So
Ding.
Drew Stevenson said that One Foot in the Grave can't be worse. So it's worse in the aspect of this book here is just like, I don't even know how to explain what this book is. The other book, One Foot in the Grave, is worse in the aspect that Chad is very arrogant. He's full of himself. He has no respect for deceased human remains or their families. I mean, he brags about shoveling a like 50-year-old corpse up in a snow shovel. And another part of it that got to me was when they put a coffin, they put a casket inside of a septic tank. And Chad just thought that was hilarious. So I was like, yeah, you're probably a bigger POS than anybody even realizes, because at that point in time, he was living in Utah still, and this was his main job, and this is how he treated the people that he was supposed to give the most care for.
Right. And at such a, anytime you're talking about a funeral director or a mortician or anybody in that, it's such a, I don't know, that it requires such respect and decorum and giving dignity to the deceased, and he exhibits none of those actions or qualities. None.
Yeah, he absolutely. I think that's what upset me so bad about it, was that he had absolutely no respect for the deceased. It's blatantly obvious in that other book that we're going to read, and then to know how Tylee and JJ were discarded on his property.
Yeah.
It enrages me. It enrages me. I'm not kidding when I said it took all I had to not just like throw my tablet and be like, ugh,
This
you're
book
a
shouldn't be on
disgrace of
Kindle.
soul.
Yeah, this book shouldn't be on Kindle. It should be like Kindling, to be honest. It's just a bunch of garbage.
I had asked the chat if there was a way for me to share this somehow, like if there's a book sharing or something on Amazon, because I'll be 100% honest, I did not want to spend my money on Chad Daybell, because essentially his publishing company, so I don't know how much of a company it is, but it's a publishing company, right? They're making money off of this, and I can only imagine that his kids are running that, and they're probably giving him that money when these books are sold.
Yeah.
So it took a lot for me to even buy these books. I think I've got like 5 or 6 of them, and I wish there was a way to share them. I will say the hard copy books I have, once we read them, I have no problem mailing them out, and you guys can pass them around if you don't want to spend your money and give it to the Daybell family, specifically Chad and his children. So,
well, and we are in a pandemic, so they can always be used as toilet paper as well.
If nobody wants them, I'll probably burn them, honestly.
No Fahrenheit 451. Don't waste it. It's good paper. Like, I don't know. You can make those like tabletop Christmas trees out of them. You could make a brooch, a pin, a pterodactyl. I don't know. Something.
Right.
A paper hat.
Yeah.
A sailboat.
Why is he called JJ? His first name is Joshua. They've always called him JJ. His JJ's birth name was actually Cannon, and they changed it to Joshua. So, yep, he goes by JJ. That's why they call him that. That does put me at ease, Annie. You make very little money off of Kindle books. What about the actual hard copy books? Because I've bought a couple hard copy books too.
It depends on what year. I mean, it just. I mean, he's self-publishing, so he's getting more than if he published with somebody else. But
right.
And Tammy did the cover art, so he probably didn't pay her, and he didn't have an editor, so he didn't have to pay an editor. So.
Yeah, so I think we're probably going to wrap it up. We're 2.5 hours into this mess of a book. Sorry if we didn't do it justice. It's very hard to read.
Dramatic reading.
But if you guys are around tomorrow, what?
I said, no, we're not going to do a dramatic reading.
What'd you say?
I said, we're not going to do a dramatic reading. That's what I said. No, because I don't know how to make my lips all weird.
Oh, yeah. So anyways, we're going to wrap it up. We are going to be back tomorrow. Same time, Amy? I don't know if we've decided on a time or not.
9:30 works for me.
Get this book. Yeah, get this book kind of knocked out and done. We are on the chapter called Life in the Garden State. So,
New Jersey?
Yes, New Jersey.
We're going to the Jersey Shore?
I wish.
Marone's here. Grab your Axe body spray, guys. Gym Tan laundry. Oh, is there going to be a Snooki? Please tell me there'll be a Snooki.
Could you imagine Chad coming across a Snooki?
Oh my gosh, that would be like the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Really. You remember when they used to have those like celebrity death match things? Like Chad Daybell and Snooki.
Oh my God, Soul for Music, you just rocked my night right there.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that, Amy. I remember that.
See, they say JWoww and Snooki, or it could be Chad Daybell versus the Meatballs. Chad No Balls versus the Meatballs. So, yeah. Lori would be all jealous of their fake tans.
Funny.
Like, I'm getting so white and I'm having to use Flavor Aid to color my lips.
Light lipstick. All right, guys. I think we're gonna wrap it up. To our bomb squad down there, all of our mods, thank you so much. We appreciate you beyond measure. You do an amazing job down there. We love you all. We're very grateful for you. And to all of our F-bombers who joined us tonight, thank you for being here and laughing with us and sticking it out through this horrid book, because it's horrible, but we're going to read it. So
he puts the whore in horrible. Good night, guys.
Good night, guys. Have a good night.